are actually older than ancient Sumeria, and ultimately, civilization is being pushed back thousands and thousands of years, and this is something that's happening all the time in archaeology. Is that we're realizing that civilization and the people who are out there building roads and bridges, pyramids, giant cities, all this goes back for thousands of years, much older than we ever thought. Mm-hmm. And if really the whole story of Atlantis is about these ancient civilizations, if civilization is really over 10,000 years old, then it's going back to before the last ice age. Mm-hmm. And, well, the mainstream archaeologists are basically saying, no, in the last ice age, people were still cavemen, living in their caves. But then around, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, people just stepped out of their caves, started building these giant megalithic cities, giant pyramids, roads and bridges and things like that. Mm-hmm. But really, civilization goes back before that. I mean, I maintain in my books that civilization goes back 15,000, 20,000 years, even more than that. And if civilization is that old, then, we don't really have a name for it except for Atlantis. I mean, that's what we might as well call it, something like that. And I think Atlantis is a good name.
Yeah, and I just want to ask you here. I mean, so with these ancient mariners in mind that seem to almost have like a global civilization, or at least a communication of a global network, so to speak. What happened to upset this communication? I mean, we have the Inquisition, or was there some kind of cataclysm involved here? What do you think?
Well, right. I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, something happened there, and it's probably happened over and over again, and it can be a combination of a lot of different things. One of the things that's going on like that, and the Olmecs is a similar situation. Imagine this for a minute. Let's say there's some cataclysm in the near future, and the world was sent back to the Stone Age, and then after 500 or 1,000 years, archaeologists, civilization came back, and archaeologists were digging up Sydney, Australia. Mm-hmm. And this is just some ruined city, and as the archaeologists did more and more excavations and discoveries in Sydney, Australia, they suddenly came to the amazing conclusion that these people in Australia spoke the same language as these people in this small little island in the North Sea. Mm-hmm. And that island is called England. And so here's this little island in the North Sea, and on the opposite side of the world, nearly as far away from England as you could possibly get, is this remote, weird city called Sydney, Australia. And archaeologists, determined that those people, they weren't from Indonesia or from India or from Vietnam or somewhere near to them. No, those cultures weren't related to Sydney, Australia. Their cultural homeland was on the other side of the earth in this small island country. Wow. And, archaeologists would be amazed that they couldn't believe it. I mean, why weren't people from Indonesia? Why wasn't it their culture that was in Sydney, Australia? I mean, it's the same kind of a thing we're looking at. I mean, so, this small island of England sent boats to the other side of the world, colonized this, remote corner of the world, and they spoke the same language, their culture was all the same, but then, let's say something happened. In this case, England was destroyed, and a giant tidal wave or earthquake wiped out London and all the port cities in England. And so, today we have super tankers and giant 747 airplanes flying all over the world, stopping in Singapore. But say this has all happened, before all that, and England was wiped out. So suddenly all the ships that used to go every year to Sydney, they just stopped going. And the people in Sydney waited for the ships to come from England, but they didn't come. And so suddenly those people are isolated. The homeland where they had originated from has been destroyed. Even they don't know what happened. Or perhaps, some ship does make it to Sydney and it tells the story of how their little island in the North Sea was destroyed. They're not going to be sending any more supplies. No more books will be going to Sydney, for people to read. And it's that kind of a thing. So when you have, and this part of the thing with the Olmecs, as I say in my book, The Mystery of the Olmecs, one of the things that's going on there is that the Olmec territory is this very narrow part of Mexico, which is known as the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Now, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, if you look at a map, this is, as Mexico narrows to a V down at the bottom, there's a very narrow little part, and it is exactly the Olmec territory. But one of the things that they found about the Olmecs, and the Olmecs are really going back 3,500 years ago, back to about 1,300 BC or so. This is some of the oldest Olmec statues, and also, by the way, the Olmecs are now credited with the invention of just about everything that the Mayans were originally said to have invented, including the number system, the Mayan hieroglyphs, the rubber balls, the ball courts. The Mayans were famous for playing these ball games. Even the building of the pyramids and all the early Mayan cities. Now, archaeologists are saying, well, the Olmecs originally built all those things. The Mayans took it all over in the end, around 500 BC.
Well, that's right, because that was one question I did wanted to ask you, because there are a lot of legends or accounts in both the Mayas and the Aztec and Incas that they weren't themselves the original builders, of many of these cities and monuments and pyramids and so forth. So, okay, you're saying that this actually is beginning to be recognized, and now the Olmecs are the origin builders of these.
That's right. So now, I mean, what archaeologists are realizing is that, yes, the Mayans originate from the Olmecs. Almost everything the Mayans have and had in ancient times came from the Olmecs, from the food, the jade mines, the ceramics, the art, the cocoa seeds, which were used as money, even ancient mining. And stuff like that is all credited now to the Olmecs. Even the number system that we use, and the calendar.
Really?
So even like now, we're talking about the Mayan calendar ending in the year 2012. Well, that came from the Olmecs.
Well, there is this legend of in Mayan culture of a guy called Itzamna, and allegedly he's actually more Caucasian looking, according to what they described him as. So, I mean, could this be an Olmec, as the origins of the Mayan calendar, I'm meaning here?
Well, yeah, sure. And one of the things you have to understand, now we know so little about the Olmecs that we don't know what their own beliefs were and whether they had different myths like the Mayans, but they probably did. And we know, though, from Mayan texts like the Popol Vuh, the Chilam Balam, Mayans still exist today in Guatemala and parts of Mexico. The Olmecs are completely gone, and there really are not Olmecs anymore, whoever they were. But the Mayans still exist, and even though large areas of the Petén jungle in northern Guatemala and other areas, huge, vast areas of just where no one lives, and there's literally thousands and even today, hardly anyone lives in this area. But there are still areas where the Mayans do still live. But the Mayans believed, and later the Aztecs and also the Hopi Indians of Arizona also believe this, that the world has been destroyed 4 times over. And this was, part of the Mayan myth and legend, and it must have come from the Olmecs, how the world was first destroyed in fire, then it was destroyed by ice, then it was destroyed by water, and each time there's been these terrible destructions of the world, and then the gods would basically, clean off the earth, and a few people would survive, very much like Noah and the Ark kind of stories.
Yeah.
And then the earth gets repopulated again. There are, the cities are rebuilt. And even part of, Mayan and Aztec myths and legends have a lot to do with giants who were building the world before, and then they were destroyed. And that today we are supposedly living in the 5th world now, and it too will be destroyed soon, and then we'll enter into another world.
That's right.
But even the destruction of the Olmecs, I suggest in my book, is whatever happened to them, and possibly it had to do with some volcanic changes, some tidal waves also that probably hit the Pacific coast. And suddenly, the Olmec world would just disappeared essentially. And I mean, it wasn't the end of civilization there, but that civilization collapsed, and what took its place were the Mixtecs, the Zapotecs, and the Mayans, who then really began their ascendancy there in Mesoamerica. And then finally, the Aztecs. And the Aztecs themselves are very recent to us, and a lot of people don't realize that, but the Aztecs only had existed for just a few hundred years prior to the European invasion of Mexico. And similarly with the Incas as well. The Incas also had only existed as a civilization just a few hundred years before the Spanish got there.
Wow. And again, there are these, amazing sites like take Teotihuacan, for example, in Mexico. And again, if you read the accounts there, it seems like this was built way, way, way before. And then, after a series of different people coming and going out of that region, I guess that the Aztecs or the Incas, I'm not sure there, moved in eventually and took over that area, and then of course the Spanish and the Portuguese came over and discovered them there. But I mean, talking again about the building itself of these monuments and structures.
And that's a really good point, and particularly in Peru, you see this also in Mexico with Tenochtitlan and things like that. And Cusco, you had asked me earlier about, my favorite places, and I was saying how Cusco in Peru is one of my favorite places. When you're in Cusco and you're walking around, it is a megalithic city. I mean, it's a city that is built out of huge blocks of stone and perfectly fitted together. It's quite amazing, and even these buildings are restaurants and hotels and little shops today around Cusco. And the Spanish have built some new buildings there and churches, but many of these old buildings are there. So it's really kind of interesting when you look at, say, Cusco today. Spanish people are living in these buildings, but they didn't build them. Those buildings existed before they ever arrived in Peru. So what modern archaeologists say is like, the Incas built those cities only a few hundred years, like 200 years before the Spanish got there. Yet when you see those buildings, and they're the same buildings that are at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and they know that those are pre-Inca buildings. So, I mean, what I maintain in my books is that just like the Spanish today are occupying and living